Hello, my name is Mary Lowry, and I have the Phenomenology of Spirit by Hegel, which is a very dense work, but I'm going to try to read it anyway. I think if we go slow, and we ask ourselves some questions as we go, maybe it'll make sense to us. Or if it doesn't, it probably won't. It'll be an amusing attempt. Preface on scientific cognition. It is customary to preface a work with an explanation of the author's aim, why he wrote the book, and the relationship in which he believes it to stand to other, earlier, or contemporary treatises on the same subject. In the case of a philosophical work, however, such an explanation seems not only superfluous, but in view of the nature of the subject matter, even inappropriate and misleading. For whatever might appropriately be said about philosophy in a preface, like a historical statement of the main drift and point of view, the general content and results, a string of random assertions and assurances about truth. None of this can be accepted as the way in which to expound philosophical truth. Also, since philosophy moves essentially in the element of universality, which includes within itself the particular, it might seem that here more than in any of the other sciences, the subject matter itself, and even in its complete nature, were expressed in the aim and the final results, the execution being, by contrast, really the unessential factor. On the other hand, in the ordinary view of anatomy, for instance, say the knowledge of the parts of the body, regarded as inanimate, we are quite sure that we do not as yet possess the subject matter itself, the content of this science, but must in addition exert ourselves to know the particulars. Further, in the case of such an aggregate of information which has no right to bear the name of science, an opening talk about aim and other such generalities is usually conducted in the same historical and uncomprehending way in which the content itself, these nerves, muscles, etc., is spoken. In the case of philosophy, on the other hand, this would give rise to the incongruity that along with the employment of such a method, its inability to grasp the truth would also be demonstrated. I have no idea why I'm doing this. Why do I think Hegel's phenomenology of spirit is right? Because of Shakti. Shakti is God within time. The time-based dynamic manifestation of God. There's a major world religion already devoted to her um, within Hinduism. And I believe that Hegel's phenomenology of spirit might on some level also be a phenomenology of Shakti. And that's why I'm reading it. Because I don't know if anyone's ever tried to read Hegel's phenomenology of spirit in quite that way before. Because a lot of Western academics have read it, and a lot of them read, Kant and Hume and Descartes beforehand, and a lot of them would read Marx and the existentialists after, and Heidegger and stuff, but you move something into a very different context, you see different sides of it. And I think that's what might happen here. So I read the first paragraph in sort of performative story teacher doing a storybook way. But it's actually not a bad paragraph. In fact, if you're going to write a preface to a book, it's beginning by philosophizing about whether or not perfect prefaces make sense is actually kind of makes a weird kind of sense. Although, I guess he's putting a lot of pressure on himself if he's like trying to expound the theory in the preface. But the bit he brought up about anatomy and the body sort of clarifies the point there because if God is at least as intricate and as nuanced and as deep as life, and I think she is, then she has a lot of little particulars, a lot of little nuances. She is spiritually operating on every little bit of quantum time, at every bit of Planck time, along every Planck length. And because she's a goddess, the goddess in a sense, I think she deserves our appreciation and our respect for all of the hard work that she does. The very attempt to define how philosophical work is supposed to be connected with other efforts to deal with the same subject matter drags in an extraneous concern, and what is really important for the cognition of the truth is obscured. The more conventional opinion gets fixated on the antithesis of truth and falsity, the more it tends to expect a given philosophical system to be either accepted or rejected, and hence it finds only acceptance or rejection. Okay, this makes perfect sense. You know how a lot of people encounter philosophy or theology through apologetics first, through the defense of the ideas they already have and the advocacy of the ideas they already have? One of the downsides of learning philosophy that way is that you're trained to divide the worldviews and philosophies of the world into those that agree with you and are therefore worth something, and those that don't and therefore can be dismissed. This is a terrible, terrible approach to philosophy and life and the discovery of new knowledge, because the diversity of philosophical systems, at least according to Hegel, and to some extent, I think, according to Spinoza, and honestly, it's kind of just true basically. The diversity of philosophical systems is the progressive unfolding of truth. The metaphor Hegel uses here is that the bud disappears in the bursting forth of the blossom, and one might say that the former is refuted by the latter. Similarly, when the fruit appears, the blossom is shown up in its turn as a false manifestation of the plant, and the fruit now emerges as the truth of it instead. These forms are not just distinguished from one another, they also supplant one another as mutually incompatible. Yet at the same time, their fluid nature makes them moments of an organic unity in which they not only do not conflict, but in which each is as necessary as the other. This might make a little bit more sense if you know stuff about the history of science. Like, Ptolemaic astronomy, the medieval astronomy where the sun revolves around the Earth, it predicted the movements of the planets correctly. Like Ptolemaic astronomy did that. The reason it sort of got replaced by Copernican astronomy is that Copernican astronomy has a simpler explanation for how to explain retrograde motion, but the Ptolemaic system wasn't wrong. It just wasn't the most right system that could exist. And Copernicus wasn't the most right system that could exist either. After him came Johann Kepler, who realized that the orbits were elliptical instead of circular. And Galileo, who noticed a bunch of little moons around Jupiter, and Newton figuring out like the laws that held everything together. When you learn about philosophy by learning about, oh, these are the hedonists, they only care about pleasure, they're silly, and these are the sophists, they think truth is relative, how dumb, you undermine your ability even to understand the truth you do have. Because the truth you do have, let's say you're a Platonist. Plato developed Platonism by listening to Socrates argue with sophists. Like, in order to develop your own idea, you need to sort of grind it against other ideas. Slavoj Žižek says that Hegel is going to be the main philosopher of the 21st century. And despite being relatively new to Hegel, I think there's a major point there, because with Hegel's conception of truth here as a project of development rather than a binary does it agree, does it not agree thing, I think that the Hegelian dialectical system is actually really, really well suited to thrive in the internet age, the age of Wikipedia, when you can Google different philosophical systems around the world, and you can Google different sciences from around the world. To the extent that philosophy is derived from real experience and real insight is true. To the extent that science is derived from empirical experiments, it is true. Which means if science is true and philosophy is mostly true, we haven't really explored the implications of both things being true at once. We've got people who are very scientific, but not very interested in philosophy. We've got people who are interested in philosophy but not very scientific. Now, I am overgeneralizing here because Niels Bohr, actually, who developed the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, was a fan of the American philosopher William James. In fact, if you understand William James and the direct realism of that, you actually are a step up in terms of understanding quantum mechanics, at least in my opinion. So I am overgeneralizing here. I overgeneralize a lot. But I don't know who's ever going to see this or think about this. And I don't know if I'm going to be reading, like, originally I was thinking of doing like some sort of weird ASMR thing with this, and now it's just sort of a ramble. But but I don't know if do you know how electromagnetic waves were discovered? Like, light is an electromagnetic wave, and of course it's crazy to say we've discovered light. Like, the moment anyone opens their eyes, they experience light. But despite light being a part of experience, since the existence of bacteria, for example, you didn't have conscious beings analyzing light and breaking it down and seeing what it's made of, really, until humans came around. And even then, it's relatively recent within human history. Um, I think our current understanding of the dynamics of the soul on its developmental journey is really kind of far behind. Behind what? Um, it's it's behind where it needs to be for humanity to thrive. And it might be utopian to talk about let's do so and so humanity can thrive when humanity hasn't thriven fully in recorded history. But we have the power to try. So I think we have a duty to try. This is kind of incoherent, but I put it out there. That's good.